Hey guys, today we are on chapter 8 of Has Anyone Seen Jessica Jenkins? And she has just gotten to that man's house that went with Nancy, who went with Nancy to get that rose quartz necklace for her. So I'm pretty sure that Jessica is gonna wear the invisibility cloak so she can go into his house. So and then Izzy is knocking on his door to distract him. So Izzy pressed the doorbell, and then she held her breath while we waited to see who would come to the door. Chapter 8. Yes, a man stood in the doorway and looked at Izzy. He was small and scruffy, his shirt half hanging out of a baggy corduroys, a tie loosely done up, and a pair of thick black-rimmed glasses halfway down his nose. "Can I help you?" he asked. He wasn't exactly unfriendly, more impatient, as though we'd disturbed him from something important. He wanted to dispense with us and get back to it as soon as he could. He was standing right in the middle of the doorway. There was barely any space to see behind him, let alone squeeze past him without knowing. I could just see a small, very sterile-looking hallway with a door leading into another room beyond. What was in that room? Izzy smiled innocently at the man. I'm really sorry to bother you," she said. "I'm looking for number 23. "This is 33, the man replied sharply. "Oh, sorry, my mistake," Izzy replied as the man went to close the door. I nudged her in the ribs to let her know I was still outside with her. Izzy leaned forward. "Wait," she said. The man paused and looked at her quizzically. I mean, please," Izzy faltered. "I know that this is 33. I'm a bit lost, and I don't know where to find the one I'm looking for." Finally, the man took a step out of his doorway. "It's that way," he said, pointing down the road. I tried to squeeze past him, but there wasn't enough space without bumping into him, and completely giving away the fact that there was an invisible person standing outside his office was the last thing I wanted to do. "Sorry, which one is that exactly?" Izzy asked. "Can you show me the exact one?" The man sighed, but he took another step away from his door. "It's 5 doors down. That's the one that's set back," he said. I didn't hear Izzy's reply. I was too busy sneaking inside and getting away from the man before he walked into me and game was up. A moment later, the door had closed. The man was heading back inside, and our investigation had well and truly begun. The first thing I thought as I looked in through a glass door from the hallway was that it reminded me a bit of the chemistry lab at school. The second thing I thought was that, actually, it was nothing like the chemistry lab at school. How it was similar to a chemistry lab, it was filled with scientific equipment and desks. A couple of long formica tables ran along one side of the room, each with tall black swivel chair tucked in beside it. Above the desks ran a long shelf, packed with jars, bottles, tubes, and boxes, each with a neatly written label. Each desk had a computer and a load of paperwork. The first desk was arranged neatly with a pile of books and a tray of folders, a desk planner, if you will. The other was covered in a heap of notebooks and papers that were arranged in the kindness of a mess that possibly made sense to the person who owned them, but looked like an amateur burglary had taken place to anyone else. Across the other side of the room, there was one long work surface. On it stood a huge microscope, surrounded by various racks with different sized test tubes propped up in them. Some of the tubes were empty, others had different sorts of liquid in them. It was hard to tell what the liquids could have been. Some were clear, others colored. There was a purple one, a pink one, a deep blue, a yellow, and a green. So far, a chemistry lab. How it was different from a chemistry lab. To start with, as the man stepped toward the glass door into the main area, the door slid open with a soft whoosh noise that sounded a bit like the spaceship doors on Star Trek, and not at all like the door to our chemistry lab. I quickly stepped through behind him and looked back as the door closed with another whoosh, followed by a soft thunk. My heart did a tiny thunk itself as I discovered that I was now hermetically sealed into a lab that I was gradually realizing looked like a cross between a high-tech experimentation center and a chemistry classroom from 100 years in the future. Bright lights shone down from the ceiling so fiercely that I felt almost pinned to the floor by them. White walls, white ceiling, everything was spotless and clinical. Machines beeped and whirred and clicked and buzzed all around me. Just down from the microscope and test tubes was a metal box with orange buttons and red lights blinking above. Next to that sat a bright blue box with a silver tube running from it up to a white tray on a high shelf. Beyond that, another machine beeped every 30 seconds, like a metal bowl, but it had a digital display on it with numbers that flashed up like pink every few seconds. There was only one tiny window at the far end of the room, small, high, and frosted so no one could see in. What on earth was this place? The man put on a pair of plastic goggles and took up from where he had presumably disturbed him where we had presumably disturbed him, studying liquids and tubes and scribbling notes. I tiptoed past him and made my way to the far end of the lab. I tried to read some of the notes. They were computer printouts adorned with additioned handwritten in multiple colors. Sentences were crossed out and written over. Footnotes and asterisks with hashtags littered all the margins. Equations that would have made my math teacher faint were randomly scattered in between barely legible notes. None of it meant the slightest thing to me until I noticed a large white plastic box at the back of the desk. It was full of crystals, piles of them, lying in groups. I swallowed. This was definitely him. Then, the man who'd bought a heap of crystals from the same shop where Nancy and I bought my necklace. Or where Nancy had bought my necklace. But what did all this mean? What did he want to do with the crystals? What were all these test tubes for? And what on earth was I to make of these notes? I kept silent and watched the man work. After a couple of minutes, he left his tubes and crossed the room to start punching buttons on one of the machines. A moment later, a handheld gadget on the table beeped. He picked it up and read the screen. Still holding it, he moved over to one of the computers. I silently dodged out of his way as he came right past me. Glancing at the screen, the gadget in his hand, he started typing into his computer. I stood behind him, holding my breath, and watched as he typed. He was muttering to himself, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. It looked like he was inputting data into a spreadsheet, numbers and words. I peered at the screen, and a moment later I had to bite my finger to stop myself from yelping out loud. Among all the gobbledygook, 3 words had jumped out at me as if they were written in bright capital and underlined 3 times. Rose quartz, invisible, ? For a moment, I just stared. My thoughts dried up. My blood froze in my veins. What did this mean? Was he the person who had given me superhuman powers? Was this what this place was about? Injecting weird liquids into crystals to make them do what the rose quartz had done to me? Or had he just discovered the rose quartz properties like I had? Either way, something super weird was going on, and if his chart was anything to go by, this man knew a whole lot more about it than I did. I tried to make some kind of sense of his spreadsheet, but other than those 3 words, the rest was a complicated mass of data that meant about as much to me as it would have had The rest of it was as complicated to me as it would have been if it was in another language. If it hadn't been essential that I remain silent, I would have kicked myself. Why hadn't I concentrated better on the spreadsheet lessons in school? I might have been able to make some sort of sense of him. But only Izzy were here with me. If only Izzy were here with me, she'd understand it much better than I could. I had a thought. I slipped my hand into my pocket and drew out my phone, double-checking that it was on silent. I found the camera button and took a shot of the computer screen. Then I hit the button to open a new text. I typed my message and sent it to Izzy. Get me out. And that is the end of chapter